Hello again, everybody. So today I want to talk about ADHD. You see a lot of self-diagnosis going on around the internet of, oh, I have this mental illness, oh, I have ADHD, I'm autistic, and things like that. A lot of self-diagnosis, and I think there's two benefits there. I think there's a double-edged sword, right? It has the benefit of, with all this information being out there already available, people are noticing things in themselves that might apply to them, that maybe they do have this illness, or, maybe they do struggle with ADHD or being, low forms of autism, high functioning forms of autism that they didn't know before. Maybe they do recognize that, they have borderline traits and stuff like that. But I think there's also a lot of misinformation, and obviously we see the glorified, oh, I have ADHD, I drink my coffee and such forth like that. So I just want to give my experience. I was diagnosed with severe ADHD at a young age, and I can say honestly, I do have severe ADHD. It is something I struggled with my whole life, and from 9 to adulthood, 18, 17, actually, when I graduated high school, I was medicated. I had been through Ritalin, I had been through Strattera, Concerta, um, Adderall, Focalin, XR. There's some others in there I'm not gonna remember. What eventually landed on that we found worked for me by the time I was freshman, sophomore in high school. Some I can't remember the details. We found that Vyvanse is what worked best for me, 30 milligram Vyvanse. And then when I was 17, I stopped taking the medicine. I always had a problem with medicine. I always did not like consuming it. Um, so after I turned 17, it was no longer, when I was in school, it was required. I had to go to the nurses every morning. She had to watch me take my pill. She had to check my mouth to make sure I didn't cheek it or tongue it or anything like that because I would do those things. I didn't like taking it. But I will say I should have, and I should have been grateful for taking it because there's a lot of things how ADHD has affected me as an adult that I wish I had just gone back and gotten medication. I can say fortunately I still struggle with it, but I'm slowly learning and have over the years healthy ways, although most of them weren't. But now the recent past year or two, I've been learning healthy ways to use my ADHD to my advantage and become more structured with it. So first things is I want to get into what does ADHD look like in somebody like me or your average person. We do know that it does affect male and female differently, but there is a lot of obviously crossover. I think the first thing obviously we can say is hyperactivity and inability to focus. ADHD people, if you are truly ADHD, we have this intense ability to hyper focus, but also an inability to focus on things we just don't care about. You know, if for instance, if when I was in school growing up, I hated I hated history. I hated social studies. I thought it was stupid. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was irrelevant and had no value to me in the future as a human. But when it came to music, I was getting flying colors of passing grades in music, because it was something I was interested in. I was so hyper focused on. I did marching band, concert band, percussion class, music appreciation, AP theory, harmony, so many things that I had filled my schedule with. And that was just music centric that I could. Wherever I had electives, that's what I was doing was music. And I had an ability to focus and concentrate in class, and I wouldn't do homework, but I did perform generally decent in my English classes because English and literature was also something I was interested. From a young age in middle school, I mentioned in a previous video, I was studying, Poe, Ginsberg, Burroughs, I was reading Capote, Camus, philosophy. I was reading Aristotle. I was reading Plato. I was looking into Galileo because I had interest in cosmology and stuff like that. So it wasn't like I wasn't immune to education, didn't want to educate myself and, broaden my horizons and, try and advance my intelligence. It's just things that I wasn't interested, I wouldn't grasp. Not only that, ADHD, you know, you have a lot of emotional volatility or irrationality when you have ADHD. It very much inhibits similar traits to borderline personality disorder or bipolar disorder. You know, um, your emotions are all over the place. The difference is a lot of times what you see, for instance, in people with bipolar disorder, they'll be manic for, they'll go manic for days on end, maybe longer, and then it's a complete depressive bout for months on end, right? Or, extended period times of depressive bouts and then extended period times of mania. Whereas ADHD, or at least as I've experienced this, we're all different, that shows itself in the forms of brief moments throughout your day, right? You will have, and if you have severe ADHD like me, I'm sure you've experienced this. You will, you can be extremely happy one moment, you're elated on top of the world, you're practicing, for instance, me, if I have my guitar and I'm playing my guitar, I'm really happy and I'm enjoying myself. And then all of a sudden, some switch flips and I'm irrationally depressed for an hour, right? 30 minutes to an hour. I'm just sobbing to myself, breaking down as a human, right? And then the next, for instance, um, let's say I'm trying to figure out something on guitar and I'm like, I get over that depressive bout. I come, I start playing guitar again. I'm trying to overcome something challenging on the guitar. And then now I'm irrationally angry for 10 minutes. And then what always happens if you have severe ADHD is, and you have experienced these things like me, is a lot of times what happens is, um, you feel so disturbed and ashamed of yourself immediately after. It's not an effect of, some people can do these things and have these make these have these anger outbursts or these depressive outbursts or stuff like that in their life, and then they won't feel bad about it for years until they really start to like identify themselves and try and fix themselves. But in my experience, at least, you know very quickly after, you're already ashamed of yourself. And that's another example of what ADHD looks like, and that's something I've dealt with as my entire adult life. And I've been trying my hardest to find my own methods in terms of fixing that, and I've come a long way with that. I still have a lot to work on, and I'm still trying to fix it every day. Not only that, just ADHD's poor choices, poor time management, financial issues. We are, at least for me as an ADHD person, I'm very, or at least for the majority of my life, I've been very fiscally irresponsible. If I see something I like, I'm just gonna buy it, or not pay my rent because I'll just give it to him next week. I want to buy this today, or I need to get this food or stuff like that. Things like that. Not managing your financial responsibilities. Not only that, ADHD people tend to have, or at least in my experience, a lot of mistakes that we don't mean to make. We tend to act in the moment. We have this weird, we have this weird, mm, another, getting back to that, weird double-edged sword ability, or at least I've experienced with ADHD, that we can, in the same breath, I'm sorry, let me collect my thoughts for a moment. I do apologize. In the same breath that we can make a mistake, we can also recognize the mistake at the same time. We also have this unique ability that among chaos, where most people would become frazzled or, overwhelmed, it's a similar effect. I do apologize. My throat was dry. I need something. We have this effect of it's like if you were to take Adderall, when things get so chaotically overwhelming, it's, for instance, I used to work in kitchens, right? I worked at a Burger King and I worked at a Korean restaurant. And every one of those moments, the line is out the door. Everybody from town is there, and everybody else in the kitchen is freaking out. What are we gonna do? Oh no, all this stuff. Like how do we balance this? And I'm here, you know, and I just see, I see all the big picture. Everybody gets frazzled and can't, calm themselves down and look at the big picture and take a moment and take a breath. Whereas, with people, or at least in my experience with severe ADHD, during those moments, what ends up happening is it's almost like it's like the same effect of Adderall. Your brain gets so overwired and overwhelmed that it snaps itself into a calm state. Much of like, I drink coffee and I like drinking coffee, but realistically, coffee doesn't do much but besides settle my brain. And that's, that's one of the ways of not taking ADHD medication. That's kind of a supplement for myself. And I don't think that's okay. I want to make it a big point right now that I don't think supplementing yourself with other things is necessarily a good thing unless it's you have talked about it with a psychiatrist or a psychologist and a practicing physician that if it is going to work for you and if it does work for you. I just don't like taking medicine, so over the years I don't have the ability to afford going into therapy as much as I wish I did, or seeing a psychiatrist and whatnot, and trying to figure out ways to I think you can live life without taking the medicine, but it's also a difficult challenge that I think a lot of people will avoid because the challenge is too difficult. It's much easier to just take the pill, and I think that's okay. If that's what works for people, that is okay. If taking medicine is what works for you, because sometimes people can't fit into their schedule the things like that they need to do to overcome, cognitive disorders or things like that, like things like ADHD, or they don't have the time to overcome those things, right? And that's okay. And if medicine is what works for you, that's what works for you. But I don't personally like taking medicine, so I am trying to find ways myself through my own studying. And I shouldn't say I don't study YouTube videos, or I'm not just studying YouTube videos or just random articles I read. I've dealt with this for a very long time in my life, so I know what it's like. I know how it affects me. I'm very self-aware of that. And so I can identify that and figure out, make a list for myself, or sticky notes and stuff like that, for reminders. One of the biggest things with ADHD is super forgetful. You might think of something and you forgot it the moment you thought about it. So one of those methods is, a method that I use is sticky notes, or writing things. I haven't used on my phone. Or I write down calendar reminders on my phone. I will put, if there's something important that I want to remember, doctor's appointments, or job interviews, or what, oh, I need to email, my son's school or something like that. I will, or call them. I will put emails. I will put calendar reminders in my Google Calendar, and I'll even I'll do phone alarms on top of that, and write it down on a sticky note. That way, and I find that when I do that, I don't ever forget it. I just do it. I don't forget to do it. I just do it. I don't need the utilization of those sticky notes, or I don't need to look at them to remember. But if I don't do that, I don't remember. And, it's kind of a little brain trick for myself. But getting back, that's what I want to do. I don't want to take medicine and other things. I wanted to get back to it as I got off track, but ADHD in adults especially, we tend to be very self-destructive, whether we mean to or not. I have made many mistakes in my life, and I will be honest, I've hurt many people, and I am deeply regretful and sorrowful for all of that. I really truly am. And if any of those people watch this or listen to, I want you to know everything that I have done in my life, I truly am apologetic for and sorry for. I'm not going to make the excuse that it was my ADHD. At the end of the day, I have the cognitive function and the self-awareness to realize what I did, maybe not in the moment, but after the fact. And if I can realize that after the fact, and quickly, with how quickly I always realize my mistakes after the fact, then I could have been more diligent about being conscious in the moment rather than just living the moment, right? So I don't want to get it twisted to say that, and I don't think anybody else ever should, you know, I think that mental illness or cognitive disorders and things like that, like bipolar and ADHD or autism or whatever, I think they can attribute to the mistakes and the actions you make. But at the end of the day, we still have to accept as humans that we chose to make those decisions and in turn make those mistakes. Um, but that's why I want to make this video. There's a lot of misinformation out there, as I explained, and people are almost glorifying ADHD, and I'm just here to say there's no glory in ADHD. I think there is unique things that people with ADHD tend to have that maybe your average person doesn't. I know more ADHD people who suffer from severe ADHD like me tend to be lean towards more creativity, whether it's art, poetry, or um, things like that. In general, whatever their passion is, they're usually really great at their passion, and that doesn't mean that they're better than other people. I don't think that. I think we just have the unique ability to put more time into it than others may be able to, or be able to be willing to give themselves. Because the difference is we don't care about anything else. We only care about that one thing. Your average person who doesn't deal with that ADHD, you know, they're caring about everything. They're like, oh, I gotta practice. I got to practice my, if I'm talking music, I got to practice my scales, or I got to practice playing in this specific key, or this modal interchange today. I'm sorry for using jargon you might understand, but, from my experience, oh, I need to practice doing this modal interchange today. If that was your average person, they'd be like, well, I can do that for an hour or an hour and a half, and then I have to go exercise, and then I got to go to out to eat with this friend, or I got to do this homework assignment and whatnot. We don't have that at ADHD. That's the only reason I think we end up being more involved in understanding and getting more knowledge in the things that we're passionate about, and the things that we end up doing with our lives for entirely, or our career choices, is because we have that unique ability to we don't I don't think it's unique. I think it's more of it can be a detriment and a blessing at the same time, right? It's a blessing in the sense of we don't care about anything else, so we just focus on the one thing we care about, and it really helps us understand it on a deeper level to guide us more properly into it in adulthood, and when we actually seek out that career and look for jobs in that position, right? But it's a detriment because you forget about the rest of your life. You forget about your family. You forget about your friends, and that comes back to another thing that is very unfortunate that I've dealt with is with ADHD, object permanence. Now, object permanence is the concept of, with ADHD people, as far as I understand it, and I have experienced this immensely, is forgetting things exist if they're not directly in front of you. And it's happened to me many times. I forget to reach out to family. I forget to reach out to my grandparents. I forget to reach out to, my own. I don't, I forget to reach out to friends. I just reached out to a friend a couple days ago, and I haven't talked to him in over a year. And he's a great friend of mine. I grew up with him. I was over his house all the time as a kid in high school and stuff like that. And I felt terrible. And it wasn't that I don't care about him. It wasn't that I don't love him. I'll always love him, and I'll always have a care for him because he's a great friend, and he had a big impact on my life. But it's the object permanence. That person isn't directly out in front of my face, and they're not directly reaching out to me. So it's not that I don't forget they exist. I just forget that they're there. I forget to reach out. And that's another struggle. And, I could go into way more detail, but, I really want to make a big effort to give a very deep explanation of to what ADHD looks like for me, and severe ADHD at that, and what it looks like for an adult. So, because there's no, yes, ADHD can have some benefits in the sense of, maybe creativity and focus in some sense, but most of it is not glory. Most of it is not fun. A lot of it sucks. You struggle with self-awareness of understanding that I have trouble focusing. I'm emotionally irrational. I have terrible financial choices. I keep hurting people and making mistakes that I don't mean to, and I feel deeply sorry for it. And then I'm sitting crying with myself, or I'm angry with myself, or things like that. Um, those things happen, and it's not a fun time. And I just don't. I want people to get help, that the help that they need. I want people to get the guidance that they need. I wish I could get the guidance that I need. And if you can't, if you're like me, and you don't have the financial ability to be able to afford therapy, or if you don't have the ability to afford therapy or anything like that, you know what I mean, and but you don't want to take medication, um, it might be your due diligence to read more about ADHD, extensively read, and don't just read any article you find, find peer-reviewed articles from, licensed psychologists, and hopefully ones that have, especially ones that have been revered or gotten awards, or, things like that, or official published books about it. Obviously, you could read about it in the DSM-5, but, you know, Really explore that, because you need to understand if you are having trouble understanding and identifying the traits that is causing you to have, and maybe you don't realize that that's a cause of your ADHD. Um, you know, read as much as you can, identify those things within yourself, and figure out what you can do to fix that for yourself, or, get the medicine. If you are diagnosed officially ADHD, and you are, you have gotten the diagnosis, and take the medicine if you have to. Just get the help that you need and help yourself, before it's too late. Mainly, this is more so to go out to people that maybe, young adults, early 19, 19, early 20s. If you took medicine in high school and you stopped taking it as an adult, take it again. you know or get into therapy as soon as possible. That way you can have a structured environment and, list of yourself on things that you need to do to overcome, or you will never overcome or cure yourself of your ADHD. It is something you have to live with, but you can find ways to live with it, and, utilize it to your advantage, and kind of overcome, try your best to overcome, or at least manage some of the, um, downsides to, you know the illness, right? um, that's what I got. I know this is a very long video, and I deeply apologize, but I really wanted to get this out there, and I wanted to talk about it, you know, just because I'm 32 now, and I've made so many terrible mistakes and hindered my own ability to persevere and be successful the way I always thought I should be and wanted to be, because of, my disability. And I hurt people in the process. I made mistakes, and I lost people in the process, and it sucks. And I don't want that for anybody else. And if anybody sits there and listens to this, and, hearing me talk about it and my frustrations and my issues with it helps them and kind of wakes them up, that's the point. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not anything. I don't have a degree or anything like that. This is just my experience, and my only goal is to try and help people, or inspire people to make motions to do better for themselves, because I know the struggles that I have and what it took for me to be inspired to do better, and that was losing my mom. Losing my mom was the biggest hit in my life that I couldn't handle, and it destroyed me as a person. And it took, I experienced that fall that Camus talked about. My pride was shattered, my life was shattered, and that it's weird the way grief works. Some people just take grief in a way that, um they live with it forever and they never get over it. And I'll be honest, I don't think you ever really do get over it, but, they don't ever move on from it. Weirdly for me, the grief turned, it kind of almost in a way rewired my brain. I don't think that's true, but obviously, because I still have ADHD symptoms, I see them every day. But it gave me a new perspective, and it kind of did a little, snap to my mental, to where I am now more focused. And that all comes from the grief of wanting to honor my mother's memory the best way that I can. And the best way that I know that I can do that is to accept the mistakes that I made, and accept that I was a terrible person and a shitty person, but try my best to move on, and in a way repent of my own sins. I'm not religious, so I don't believe in all the godly stuff, but I think a man at some point does have to repent, you know what I mean, and fix himself. Not man, but human in general, if they've been a certain type of way. And yeah, I mean, that's all I got. So if this helps you, awesome. I really hope it does. And, if you are struggling with severe ADHD, and, maybe there's something happening in your life, you've made mistakes and you've hurt people like I have, and, you feel the fear, as every human does, of judgment, and that's why you don't talk about those things. um, Reach out. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not gonna be able to give you solutions. And I don't think you should really listen to anything that I say in terms of solution wise or how to fix your life. I really don't think you should. I'm not a life coach. I'm not anything like that. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm just talking experience. But, you know, maybe I can help you identify stuff, you know. But take everything I say with a grain of salt. Take the experiences that I've explained and apply them to yourself. And are they relevant to you? Do you think this can help you? If it doesn't, then take my video and go, you know, ignore my video and go fuck off somewhere. That's fine. But if it helps you, you know, thank you. And I'm grateful that it could help you, you know.